How many of you would say that you want your life to matter? Okay, if you for whatever reason, a couple people didn't raise their hand. How many of you want to know your life has meaning and purpose? Okay, awesome. All right, awesome. How many of you would be honest enough? Now, this is a don't raise your hand question. It's an answer to yourself. How many of you would be honest enough to say that you wonder if you really matter? I mean, is there really even point to this? I mean, as much as we want our life to matter, maybe you kind of go, am I even leaving a mark? Is anyone going to even remember me? Or am I just consuming oxygen and producing carbon dioxide and occasionally eating a decent meal? I think there's a both and in every single one of us. I think we're desperate to know our lives matter. And sometimes we're like, dude, I'm crushing it right now. Here we go. And other times, especially maybe late at night or when we're not feeling so great and we're sitting in our apartment by ourselves, kind of look around and go, is this it? And I wonder if part of our struggle in answering that is we misunderstand where we sit sometimes. See, we've been looking the last couple weeks at these stories Jesus told. They're called parables, and we kind of put that, you can see that. But Jesus had this profound way of walking around and taking something that everybody kind of knew and understood and saying, God's like that. And we talked about, the first Sunday, we talked about, the fact that, Jesus said, well, you see, you could build your house up on a cliff, or you could build it over here on the beach. And when the storms come, the cliff's better. And what he was telling us, he's like, listen, if you follow what I'm saying to you and not just listen to me, but put it into action, and don't just get knowledge, but actually follow me and act on it, your life can have stability like that cliff. But if you don't, and you're kind of just piecing things together, when the storms come, sands shift. And if you've ever watched sand underneath the ocean, it just kind of flops around. There's no stability to it whatsoever. And I wonder if that's kind of the overarching idea to this whole parable study is we have to do more than just listen. If all you do is listen to me today, if all you do is read God's word and just kind of go, that's cool, but you don't follow it. And I mean more than like follow. If you follow somebody on Instagram, really you're just like saying, that's cool, I want to hear more about that. I don't mean follow like that. I mean actually take what you read and go, all right, how can I take that and put action to it and start to actively follow? It's like we talked about last week. Don't just like Jesus. Don't just fanboy Jesus. Actually chase after him. Remember that? We talked about that last week? Okay, so we've talked a lot about, for our entire existence as a church, a little over a year now, right? We've talked about how much God loves us. We've talked about how much he wants for us and all that. And I need you to grab onto that reality really strongly right now. Because if we're going to truly study God's word and read everything Jesus says, there's some things that on the surface don't sound super loving. Unless we dive in and take a full look, I'm about to read you something that when we read it, it sounds like, yo, God, where's the love? Go with me. Because I think if we understand and we look at our lives and we kind of go, well, and we start to wonder if we have purpose, I think the reason we start to wonder if we have purpose sometimes is we must understand where we are. And if you hear what we're about to read from the beginning as God, where's the love? You don't understand the full heart of God in it. And I'm going to take you there. But I want to prepare you for it so it doesn't feel like a whoa. Because we've been talking about God's love for a long time. But today we have to wrestle with the idea that God is a king. He is a king. And there's some things in the idea of him as king that calls greatness out of us if we allow it to. But kings have some stuff, all right? So I'm just saying it's going in our 21st century ears, this is going to sound rough. Just walk with us. I guarantee you, Jesus is getting at something. You trust me? I trust you, Pastor. All right. Turn to Luke chapter 19. Luke chapter 19. Not Lamentations. That's a story for another day. Luke chapter 19. Luke chapter 19, starting in verse 11. Jesus is talking to a bunch of guys. He's talking to his disciples. There's a whole bunch of people around. And he tells a story. And he's getting at something. And Luke chapter 19, starting in verse 11, it says this. The crowd was listening to everything Jesus said. And because he was nearing Jerusalem, he told them the story to correct the impression of that the kingdom of God would begin right away. He said, a nobleman was called away to a distant empire to be crowned king and then return. Before he left, he called together 10 of his servants and invited among them 10 pounds of silver, saying, invest this for me while I'm gone. But his people hated him and sent a delegation out after him, saying, we do not want him to be our king. After he was crowned king, he returned and called the servants to whom he had given the money. He wanted to find out what their profits were. The first servant reported, Master, I have invested your money and made 10 times the original amount. Well done, the king exclaimed. You are a good servant. You have been faithful with the little I've entrusted to you. So you will be governor of 10 cities as your reward. The next servant said, Master, I invested your money and made 5 times the original amount. Well done, the king said. You will be governor over 5 cities. But the third servant brought back only the original amount of money and said, Master, I hid your money and kept it safe. I was afraid because you were a hard man to deal with, taking what isn't yours and harvesting crops you didn't plant. You wicked servant, the king said. Your own words condemn you. If you knew that I was a hard man who takes what isn't mine and harvests crops that I didn't plant, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I would have gotten some interest on it. Then, turning to the others standing nearby, the king ordered, take the money from this servant and give it to the one who has 10 pounds. But master, they replied, he already has 10 pounds. Yes, the king replied, and to those who use well what they are given, even more will be given. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. And as for those enemies of mine who didn't want me to be their king, bring them in and execute them in front of me, right here in front of me. Whew. That's a bit brutal. Most of the time our culture right now wants to talk about buddy Jesus, not brutal Jesus. You know what I'm saying? I mean, let's be real. That's pretty intense. You didn't do what I told you. I'm taking your stuff and giving it to somebody else. Oh, and all you guys over there want money? Hey, let's go. You're done. That doesn't sit well with the Jesus loves me, this I know. What the Bible tells me. So, I mean, what do we do? What do we do with that? And why did Jesus pick that? I mean, Jesus, okay, I get it. You could have said some other things, but you pick king. And what we have to know is Jesus speaks to very specific situations that people are familiar with. You ever had God speak to you kind of about a situation that you know, and he goes, hey, remember that right there? And he kind of starts to show you something. Anybody have that happen? Jesus is speaking about a very specific situation. I'll show you. So if you remember when Jesus was born, there's this king called Herod. Everybody know who Herod is? Okay, so what Jesus is talking to is right before this, as Jesus is kind of growing up, Herod dies. And Herod has 2 sons. One son, his oldest, heads to Rome to get anointed as king. His second son takes off and outruns him and gets to Rome. And this whole brouhaha starts with who gets to be king. So when Jesus gets up and says, hey, a guy leaves to go get an anointed king, he's saying, hey, you guys have seen this scenario before. And so this isn't an imaginary scenario he brings out. He's going, hey, God is like this. Can I show you? And so for us, we go, what? And for everybody in the moment, they lean in and go, okay, help us. And so if we could kind of translate away from our 21st century perspective on this and kind of put ourselves in, okay, they just watched their government go crazy. Man, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? They just watched their government go crazy. Things start to happen, and Jesus says, hey, I know what you just watched. Can I show you how a good king does this? And what I want you to see is Jesus doesn't leave. There's one big idea that Jesus doesn't leave up for grabs. And it's not just here, but over and over and over and over and over. Throughout all of Scripture, there's a big idea, and we got to get it. God is a king, and all of creation is his kingdom. He reigns, period. Period. And that means if all of creation is his kingdom, guess where you sit? In his kingdom. You can choose to be a participant or not. You can choose to engage or not. But you sit in it. I mean, it's just kind of kind of how it goes. And you're like, well, how does that work? And how does all that, well, listen, you have to understand some things about the heart of a king and why he is framed as king. Kings, there's some things about kings. And if we're going to understand God as king, we kind of have to understand what does that mean? And how many of you know that kings are always up to something? Kings are about their kingdom. They're always about trying to do something, to move an agenda forward, to expand influence, to grow, to build, to take care of their people. And so what that means is they look at their kingdom through one lens: resources. Kings look at them and say, okay, I've got all this going on. To move the kingdom forward, what do I have before me? To move what God wants to do, what does he have before me? And I want you to hear this beyond anything else today. If you don't like the idea necessarily of this whole king business, because maybe you grew up in a country that, that kings kind of messed up a little bit. Human kings are entirely messy things. Aren't you glad God's not a human king? I mean, we mess things up all the time. But what you've got to hear is Jesus frames him as king because, let me say it a different way to you, he's a king with a kingdom, and you're in the kingdom, so that means God has a purpose for you. Kings have a purpose for all of their people. God has a purpose for all of his people, and that includes you. You have a purpose. In fact, let me just say that right now. So we say, I have a purpose. God has a purpose for you. And he gives things to you, and he puts things in your life, because king's hearts, the way a king thinks is, maybe this is the first thing we need to know about the heart of a king, is kings give resources, and they expect them to be used. Kings give resources and expect them to be used. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but it's a very interesting thing. A couple weeks ago, I don't know if you saw this in the news or maybe on your news feed or whatever, there's this team up at MIT, and they actually were able to design a human body. They went and crafted it, took some dirt and crafted it, and made all the systems, and were able to design it. And it took them some time, but they were actually able to bring it to life. And they were actually going to have this huge media event. They were going to put it in. They were like, man, we've finally proven it. We've finally proven that we don't need God. And they're like, what? And they were kind of running around. They were like, all right, we got it. And I think it was like 2 Mondays ago. And Sunday night, word got out, and the dean up at MIT got a text. And it was a very simple text. They were kind of okay. And it just said, hey, ask the team where they got the dirt. Thanks, God. There's a joke, okay? Maybe that didn't work, but think about it. I mean, we're so confident, right, that we can do all these things, and God's like, hey, I gave you everything. And maybe the first thing we need to realize is every resource you have comes from God. The air you breathe, the food you eat, the bed you wake up in, the money you work, even some of the stuff you build. Like Carrie's a phenomenal cook. We ate really, really great this past week, and it's been awesome. But she didn't make the pig that became the sausage. She had nothing to do with the wheat that became the pasta. I mean, I like to eat it, but it's not, when we sit down to dinner and go, God, thanks for food, it's great, thanks for mommy making it. But when it all comes down to it, even the fact that we can say thank you is from God. And so maybe we should first kind of think about this whole idea of in a kingdom, everything belongs to the king. When you think about old school kingdoms, everything belongs to the king. He'd give you stuff. Here's some land. Can you go farm this for us? Here's some things. And every resource that a king gives out, he expects to be used, because kings give resources and expect them to be used. Let me show you how it works in Scripture. Romans chapter 12, starting in verse 6, says this. They'll put it up on the board. It says, in his grace, God has given us different gifts for doing certain things well. So if God has given you the ability to prophesy, speak out with as much faith as God has given you. If your gift is serving others, serve them well. If you're a teacher, teach well. If your gift is to encourage others, be encouraging. If it is giving, give generously. If God has given you leadership ability, take the responsibility seriously. And if you have a gift for showing kindness to others, do it gladly. You have gifts. You have gifts. If you're like, well, I'm just me. No, I'm telling you, you have gifts. God has put resources in front of you. In fact, I'll bet you $100 right here that you can't think of a single thing in your life that you created on your own. If you can come up with one thing that you single-handedly, I'll give you $100. By the way, that thinking you're doing with that beautiful brain you have, that's also his. The idea, and so we're like, okay, God, what do you want me to do? And if we look at it going back to the parable, I don't know how many talents, I don't know how many dollars, I don't know if you were given 1 or 15, but in this story, everybody was given the same. And he came back and he said, hey, what'd you do with it? What did you do with it? He has given you gifts, talents, passions, personality. And the cool thing is you might not have gotten the same thing, but he wants you to do something with us. And I'm convinced that if we would just take a minute and look at the gifts, talents, passions, things God has put inside of us, we can get a little bit of an idea about the purpose he may have for us. You're like, well, what is my purpose? What's God's plan for me? Take a look. Engineers engineer things to certain ends. Okay, what do you mean? Okay, check it out. If you take a Honda Accord and a Mack truck, a Peterbilt, an 18-wheeler, whatever you want to call them, and you just look at them, one of them is very clearly designed to carry people. It's soft inside. The suspension makes it ride easily. It's wonderful. They've got seat belts all over so you don't fly around. The other one, very clearly designed to carry cargo. The suspension's totally different. In fact, if you drive this one empty, the gas mileage is horrible. You put a load on it, the gas mileage actually goes up. You're like, well, how does that work? Trust me, it just does. I don't know that I totally understand it either because wait, it's pulling weight. I read it. I mean, that's true, right? It's like I saw it on the internet. It must be true. Yeah, right. Okay, good luck. I don't know. Someone's Googling it right now is going to prove me wrong. I read it. It sounds good. Fact check me later. Okay, but anyway, you've got these two things, right? One is for people. One is for cargo. If you take the people and put it in the back of this trailer, we got a problem. People are going to get all messed up and somebody's going to jail. If you take the cargo and put it in a Honda, it's all messed up and you just destroyed the Honda. It doesn't work. Like, oh, that's kind of cool. We'll just take it one step further. If you take cargo, two things designed to carry cargo, we'll just go that same 18-wheeler and a barge, like out on the bay, right? You put that barge in the middle of the pike, it goes nowhere. You put that truck in the middle of Boston Harbor, the only place it's going is down. You can look at your life, a good way to determine what God might be wanting to do. His purpose and plan for your life is to take a look at the way he's made you. It's the entire reason we do 102. Like 102, yeah, so you may not know this, but today after church and several times throughout the year, we hold an event called 102. And we go through and we give you an assessment. It's like, okay, what does it look like you're passionate about? What does it look like your gifts are? What does it look like this? Come sit out and hang out with us. And then when we do that, it's like, you know what? What if God wanted to do this through you? And you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. I want to go do that. Awesome. Today, right after church, I don't care whether you're signed up for it or not. Just go up to the library on the second floor. We will figure out how to get you connected to it. Why? Because God has a purpose for you. And the more time you waste not trying to get engaged and engaging that purpose, the less of God's kingdom gets built here on earth. You matter. You matter. You matter. You're like, okay, that's kind of cool. I matter. All right, so we want you to get engaged with that. But if you go looking down through these things, 102 is awesome. Living with purpose is awesome, but there's bad news. And the bad news is there are some people, there are forces out there that are going to resist God's kingdom. And like, oh, well, that gets us to that third group of people that we don't want to think about, where Jesus said, the king says, bring them in here and execute them right now. Can we let's get a little bit of perspective on what's happening right there. You've got a person who is the rightful heir going to be crowned king, and all of a sudden you've got somebody over here saying, no, we don't want that. We don't want that. I want that. That would be like, let's say you've got someone you asked to come watch your house while you go on vacation. Can you come house sit for me? And while they're at your house, they start filing paperwork to take over your house. They file paperwork with the town, and they say, we want the house. And then when you come home, not only that, but they've tried to seduce your spouse. And then after that, they start trying to brainwash your kids that they're actually your parents, or that they're their kids' parents. And so what you've got here is someone literally saying, we don't want you. In fact, what you want, we want, and we're going to take it, and you're not going to stop us. I mean, you understand this wasn't just someone saying, hey, we really don't want you to be king. They sent like people around saying, we don't want that, trying to overcome. And you know what happens if you do that to me? You come in trying to take my home, trying to seduce Carrie, and tell Alexis, Colin, and Gavin that they're not my kids, they're your kids. We're going to have words. And probably not many, because I'm not going to be too wanting to talk to you. I'm going to deal with you. Because if we've gotten to that point, you're not mad at me. You're not envious of me. You are opposing me, and you are trying to steal from me. So looking at it through that lens, that whole what happened at the end with those people, it's just natural consequences. You took on a king. And you try to, because I might not be the king of your castle, but I am the king of my castle. And I'm going to protect it. And that's what we have to understand about the kind of the second thing about the heart of a king is kings fight to protect and promote, not to punish. Because I wonder if when we're watching all this, if even one of those people would have said, I was totally wrong. Do you think that would have gone that way? No, they were sitting there going, wait a minute. You only gave him one, and you're giving it to them? Even when he is rewarding good performance, when he's saying, that person didn't really help, we need to get over to here so the kingdom can grow even more. The people that wound up getting killed, did you hear what it said? They were the ones going, hey, wait a minute. That's not fair. You took the one and gave it to it was his to give away anyway. Do you see that it's so easy to read this and go, what's up with that? He just had those people killed, and they're the ones fighting him even after he's back, trying to reward good performance. They're like, we want that, we want that, we want that. And he's like, you know what, done. We got places to go. We got things to build. We got hope to bring. Because you remember when kingdoms thrive, people eat. Food is in the barns. People are protected. The raiders that are coming. This is a king trying to build and protect his people. And these people are here like, the heart of a king is to promote and protect, not to punish. And the crazy thing about it is this is what happens to the disciples after Jesus. There's a phenomenal story. And right after Jesus is resurrected and goes into heaven, the disciples start running into problems. And they start running into problems with religious leaders, and they come and they're trying to arrest them and beat them and get them to shut up and not talk about Jesus. And as they're standing, as a bunch of them are standing before this hearing, one of the key judges in the hearing kind of says, hold on a second. And this is what it says in Acts chapter 5, verse 38. Listen, he gets this principle we're talking about. He says this, he says, so my advice is, leave these men alone. Leave the disciples alone. Let them go. If they are planning and doing these things on their own, or merely on their own, it will soon be overthrown. But if it is from God, you will not be able to overthrow them. You may even find yourself fighting against God. What he's saying to them is, listen, if these are aligned with the plans of God, we're going to have a problem. If not, it's going to go. But we don't want to be on the wrong side here. They knew that when you oppose a king, there's going to be problems. I originally wrote this when I was kind of going through this. My original thought about what to frame the second point here was fighting a king is fatal. But it still leaves it into that whole, man, because it sounds like, man, I'm going to take you on, and all of a sudden the king's whacking your head off because you decided to resist him. No. It's a good king is focused on, I'm going this way, and there's this noise over here. Would you stop, please? And when it comes in, and when the sword's about to swing to take his head off so they can take the crown, it's over. It's over. Fighting a king is not only fatal, but when you understand the heart of the king, things are good. Psalm 2. This is kind of one of those, but listen to what it says. Psalm 2, starting in verse 2, says this: the kings of the earth prepare for battle. The rulers plot together against the Lord, against his anointed one. Let us break their chains, they cry, and free ourselves from slavery to God. But the one who rules in heaven laughs at them. The Lord scoffs at them, and then in anger he rebukes them, terrifying them with his fierce fury. For the Lord declares, I have placed my chosen king on the throne on Jerusalem. on my holy mountain. And you're like, yo, mean Jesus again. And they're wondering, like, we need to free ourselves from slavery to God, free ourselves from the one with all these rules, free ourselves from the one who never lets me do anything my way. And can I just take it from that for a second and boil it down to real-time reality right now? I would imagine in every single one of us, there's a part where, dude, God, I just don't like your rules. Sometimes, God, it'd be easier if I could just do my own thing, if you would stay out of my business. Did the pastor really just say be nice? Yeah, sometimes God's rules are super inconvenient. They just are. And sometimes they're not even what I want. But what are some of God's rules that we just don't like sometimes? How about this one? I mean, this is going to, just for a second. We don't typically like the fact that God says no to sex outside of marriage. We don't like that at all. But if God's trying to promote and protect, he's about building a kingdom, right? I mean, he's about trying to bring health and life and hope and freedom and not bring cheap temporary knockoffs to these things. And he wants you to be one who lives and breathes true life and hope and bring it to others. Maybe when he says no sex outside of marriage, we should go, first of all, sex was his idea. So it can't be that he doesn't like it. I mean, well, we'll just leave that there. You can fill in whatever. But, I mean, if he didn't like it, didn't think it was good, it probably wouldn't feel the way it does. I'll just leave it there for a second. But he says sex was his idea, and he wants you to use it to create life and health and emotional stability and long-term commitment and the enjoining of two becoming one flesh. Outside of that, it's ridiculously destructive. And oh, by the way, if that's what he's wanting to promote, why wouldn't he say, don't do it till there? He's not trying to cheat you. He's trying to set you up for the greatest possible thing you could ever imagine and use it to promote health, life, joy, peace, love, faithfulness, all that kind of stuff in the bounds of one-on-one. You know what I'm talking about? We just talked about that. Yeah, so we'll just keep going. How about drunkenness and warning against drug use? You're like, I'm never coming back to this church again. He just went for the big two. What on earth is going on? Well, hold on. It's not because he says wine is bad. I mean, the wedding at Cana, his very first miracle, Jesus' very first miracle was turning water into wine. And if you read it, it talks about, how people are getting wasted and all that. God is not saying don't drink wine at all. He's saying don't become drunk on too much wine. Why? Because maybe, just maybe, addiction and escapism and that bondage and the diminished capacity to do your purpose. I mean, you understand when you are inebriated or out of it or stoned or whatever, you do not have your full capacity to live out God's purpose in your life. And if you are so consumed with chasing after that thing, guess what is Lord in your life? So he is not trying to rob you and keep you from. He is worried about calling you to. And if we give up that and we kind of say, hey, listen, I know you have an apple pie for me, but I'm going to sit over here with my mud pie. He looks down and he goes, what are you doing? I've got this. And we're like, stop telling me that I don't have to eat this. Leave me alone. Like, well, but I got this. How about this? Don't lie. Treat others the way you want to be treated. The social business ethics that we're supposed to live by as believers, they're not norms, by the way. They're abnormal. We talked about last week, don't lie. When we talked about immigration a little bit last week, don't lie. Be honest. Let God bless you and move and set you free. We talked about all that. That's not normal. Trusting God, radical, just forthrightness, here we go, is not normal. You want to know why he wants us to do that? It's not just for you. You are interacting with other agents of God's kingdom. And if there's not truth and moving back and forth and all that, guess what doesn't get moved forward? God's kingdom, because things start to take root and there's jealousy and infighting and all of that. God isn't about, hey, I'm going to rob you. He's about, let me bless you and bless everyone around you. And you have to know, there are forces around us and forces in us that are opposing that. And they're like, oh, That's why God talks about weeding your garden, and it's why it talks about in Matthew 13, a gardener having to go out and being not just weeding his garden, but being careful how he weeds, because he will pull up healthy things when he does it. We're supposed to weed and tend our garden. That's why he uses words like pruning so we can be most productive. John 15, he talks about, the gardener going out and pruning things off. He is all about making you most productive, maximizing you in your purpose. That's what he wants for you. And here's the cool thing. We've looked at the two opposite ends of the spectrum. We've looked at the whole, man, you got all this. It's great. Good job. We look at this, we're going, okay, you're going to get killed. Bad job. But then there's this one really troubling one in the middle. The one with one. The one that comes back and he just said, hey, I'll give you this one thing back. And the other guy, right? The guy who just has one. He's not celebrated. He's not killed. He's kind of going, hey, just go sit over there. You missed it. He's cast out, and he's kind of going, and you can almost picture him, like, when things start to go well, he's like sitting on the outside, kind of beating on the glass, hey, and maybe he's like, smashing his face up against it, like, what about me? And you're like, I don't want to be that guy, but he literally loses everything he has. And that's kind of the third idea we got to get when it comes to kings, right? They give us resources, they expect us to use them. The king looks down at us and he says, hey, I'm going to fight to promote and protect what I'm trying to build through you, not to punish you. And then he kind of looks and he says, hey, by the way, and then all that, but then he looks at this one and he says, hey, there's a third thing you need to know about my heart, and it's not doing is not an option. Doing nothing is not an option. Kings look for an ROI on their investment. Your skills, your resources, your home, your breath, your life, your strength, your fingers, if you've got 10 or 3, are all on loan from him. And should you feel responsibility? Yes. Should you feel some sense of ownership? Yes. But to what end? To build and do something. And you're like, man, well, it's not really fair, right? I mean, look at that dude. He's got like 1,400 talents. I mean, he's got it all. In fact, not only does he have talents, he was born into money. And not only was he born into money, he got to go over, he's privileged. The cool thing is, that may be true. You may not start from the same place or be playing with the same deck of cards that somebody else is. But Jesus tells a very similar story that I want to look at real quick, because if you read it, this story that we just read, that we've been talking about, everybody got equal. He took his 10, separated among 10. There's another story. It's similar, but he doesn't leave us the opportunity to go, oh, well, it's not fair. Because in this one, in Matthew chapter 25, starting in verse 14, I'm going to put it up there so we can read it together. It says, again, this is Jesus talking, again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. And then he left on his trip. So just in case you missed it, one person, he's hooked up. The next person's got some and is ready to go. And the last person got 1 or 2 to kind of see what they could do with. So different, massively different starting places. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and gave them an account of and called them to give an account for how they'd used his money. The servant whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward and said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I've earned 5 more. The master was full of praise. Goes to the next one. Master, I've earned 2 more. The master's full of praise. Says, come, enjoy your master's happiness. Same. If you skip down a little bit, then the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here is your money back. But the master replied, you wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. Then he ordered, take the money from this servant and give it to the one with 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. One guy got 5. One guy got 2. One guy got 1. They're not accountable for the amount they start with. They're accountable for what they do with it. Jesus doesn't leave us. He knew we would fight that. He knew he'd kind of go, well, I only got this. So he tells another story. Not to punish. Kings don't act to punish. They don't take away, but to promote. He rewards and said, okay, this resource is going to go over here because they used it. And I wonder, this whole thing sounds so harsh, but I wonder if by taking a look at the hearts of those who miss it and what's going on inside of them, if it actually reveals that the biggest issue here, I wonder if the issue is that they missed, they either couldn't see it, wouldn't see it, or didn't want to see it. If they missed God's heart. They missed the heart of the king who owned everything anyway, who was willing to give. And I wonder if that one person who was given the one and buried it, what he's really saying, if you boil it all down, is I was scared that I wasn't going to do the right thing, so I did nothing. I wasn't sure, so I chose to not. And I want to laser in on that because I don't think any of us in this room are going to fight God's kingdom. If we know where I don't think any of us fit that. If you do, I would love to talk to you because you need a pastor or a friend to walk with you to help you see how good God is. You're welcome here. We'd love for you to be here. But I think most of us in this room, because I've had conversations with most people in this room, that's not where you sit. But you are wondering, what is my purpose? What am I supposed to do with the gifts God has given me? I'm just not sure, and I don't want to be wrong. So I'm going to wait till I'm sure so I don't mess up what God gives me. Do you see the parallel between that logic and the person with only one? I'm afraid God will punish me if I mess it up. I'm afraid if I do the wrong thing, God's going to be mad at me. I'm afraid I'm going to let God down, so I'm going to do nothing and hold off. And God would say to you, just put it in the bank and earn me interest. Just get moving. It's like, well, how does that work? I want you to know that you see God perhaps as one who's like, oh, and you miss that he is a cheerleader for you. He put those gifts in you. He wants you to use them. And what better way to use them and grow in them if you just get started? With the team earlier this week, earlier today, we were laughing about the guy who sits here. Can't wait for Tony to join us in a couple weeks. Tony's going to speak with me in a couple weeks during church. It's going to be awesome and amazing. God's doing great stuff in Tony Reyes' life. But when this all started, it's like, hey, dude, heard you play drums. And he sat down. He's like, okay, I'll come. And we put headphones on. Because if you notice, all of our musicians wear ear stuff. And what's in their ears, they hear things totally differently than you do. They hear the click, and it says, okay, we're going to do chorus now. So it walks them through so they're all on the same page. First time Tony heard that, he was like, yo, dude, I can't do this. And walked away. But we had a team around him. Hey, dude, come back. It's why he said, if you know, for a while, Tony was back in the back. Tony doesn't belong in the back. He belongs right here playing drums. He's a phenomenal drummer. I don't know where you belong. I don't. But what I'm encouraging you to do is just step out and do something. For example, maybe you're like, hey, I work with kids a little bit, or maybe you feel called to mentor the next generation or whatever. You know how to build your skills? Jump up and work with the one kids team. And like, really? Yes. Because guess what? It doesn't have to be your forever. It could just be, let's get started. Let's get moving. Help coach, because there's amazing things going on up there. You're like, listen, I don't know what I got, but I got muscles. I can carry stuff. Guess what? There's a team that shows up here every Sunday at 7 in the morning. Come just jump in. Get moving, because it might be as we're rolling, you're like, hey, I actually know how to do that. Awesome. Go get in there. But we're not going to know that. You're not going to know that unless you're in moving, doing it together. You're like, hey, I kind of play a little bit. I'm kind of good a little bit. In fact, I'm actually better than Tony. We need 2 drummers. We need some guitarists. Well, let's go. Jump in. Why not? And, hey, maybe you're just not sure. 102 is all about that. I'm inviting you. I'm saying if it's true you have purpose and you haven't got moving or you aren't using your gifts to build God's kingdom, God, we got places we're going here. What if this place had 200 people in it? We don't have 200 people in it because we couldn't take care of 200 people. I need you to hear God saying, I put gifts and resources and skills inside of you. Let's go. Let's go. There's a phenomenal recording studio we just found over in Dorchester. It's 3 miles from here. We need to get our team in there working, rehearsing, all that kind of stuff. What if we did a worship night in there? Well, guess what? To pull off worship nights in there's some stuff that has to happen, and we need you on the team. Jump in. So I ask you, let me just... If you're afraid of being wrong, if you're afraid that someone might take advantage of you, if you are afraid, insert whatever, being afraid of doing nothing, you are so afraid of doing the wrong thing or being attached to the wrong thing that you do nothing, it's fear. You're not living life listening to God, you're living life listening to fear. Because when you understand the heart of this king, that his heart is for you, not against you, that he has chosen you, that he is calling to you. Listen what happens when you understand the heart of this king. In 1 John 4, starting in verse 17, it says, as we live in God, our love grows more perfect. So we will not be afraid on the day of judgment, but we can face him with confidence because we live like Jesus here in this world. Such love has no fear because perfect love expels all fear. If you understand the heart of God, that it is for you, you understand the love of God. He is such a mighty king, and his love is so mighty, it drives fear from your life. And so if there's any part of you saying, I can't jump in because I'm afraid I might recognize whose voice that is, and let me tell you, it is not God's. God says to you, jump in. God says to you, you are created to be part of a family. God says to you, come build my kingdom. God says to you, you are chosen. In fact, I wonder if maybe what God is saying to you is that I'm different, that this king is different. What talent has this king given you to build his kingdom? This king died for you and wants the absolute best for you, but he demands everything from you. I'm like, what? That's the deal. If you want everything, if you want Jesus to be your everything and all the songs we talked about, he is a king. And are you building his kingdom, trying to build your own kingdom, or subverting his kingdom? Let me use some kingdom language for you. Maybe you've seen some Lord of the Rings. Maybe you've seen some other knight around table, whatever. There's a moment when a knight or a lord or a lady or maybe a peasant comes to the king and swears fealty to the king. And it's I surrender. You are king. You are in charge. You are Lord, and I give everything to you. Use me. And often we come to this part of service, and I say, hey, if you've never given your heart to Jesus, and we make it all about what God can do in you, and he does. He wants to forgive you. And if you're sitting here and you've never said yes to Jesus, and you're like, this king stuff is hard, yes, but he is a good king. He came and died so you can become everything he created you to be. And so if you hear me talking about purpose and you need that, the answer to this, and maybe you've stepped toward it before and you got scared, but the answer to it is, when is the last time you have actually bent your knee and sworn allegiance to the king? What? Yeah, that's what this whole thing is about. When we sing songs, sing it through that lens and realizing you are talking to a king who loves you, but he's a king. A king who dies for you, but he's a king. So if you've never, 2 questions. If you've never said yes to God and made Jesus the King of your life, who would willingly die and rise again for you, and you're like, I need that, but you've never said yes to it, in just a minute, I'm going to give you a moment. In just a minute, like, I need to do that. Show me more, Pastor. We'll get to that in just a moment. For those of you who've already said that, maybe you took a step, but you're like, I need to take a step again because Matt, what you're talking about right now, God is messing with me, and I need to take a step toward it. So whichever you are in, whether it be the first time you answer this question or the second or third, 100th time, I want to ask you a question. Will you surrender your life to the King today?